Louisiana, 1832. The air was thick, the kind of thick that carried secrets. Cypress trees whispered outside, the ground sticky with mud, and in the Broussard household a dinner was being prepared. Silver gleamed under candlelight, the roast smelled like pride, and a blind man stood silently by the door, waiting. His name was Ayuba. He had no eyes to see them, but he could hear everything. Every laugh, every shift of a chair, every breath. Tonight the Broussards believed they were celebrating wealth and control. Tonight Ayuba was serving something they would never forget. They thought of him as harmless. A blind slave. A body that could carry, pour, and serve, but never resist. What could he do without sight? That's the mistake they made. They forgot that blindness sharpens everything else. Ayuba had ears that could measure distance, footsteps, lies. A nose that could separate spice from sickness. A memory that mapped every corner of the house by sound. They gave him nothing but silence, and he used that silence as a weapon. The Broussard family was proud, cruel, and convinced of their invincibility. Edmund Broussard, the patriarch, a man whose voice cracked like a whip, even when he whispered. Eleanor, his wife, whose softness had rotted into bitterness years ago. Their sons, Thomas and Julian, one too arrogant, one too weak. Edmund's brother Silas, who hid violence behind jokes. And then there was Agnes, the matriarch, old but sharp, a woman who claimed she could taste the truth in a man's breath. They believed they ruled their world. They believed Ayuba was nothing but a shadow at their table. But that night the food smelled wrong. Beneath the layers of spice and roasted meat, there was another smell. Something sour, faint, but impossible to ignore. Agnes sniffed first, her lips curling. "Something's wrong," she muttered, her voice dry and cracked. Every head turned. Forks paused. The flicker of candlelight trembled against uneasy faces. And there he was, Ayuba, blind and silent, standing by the table with his hands folded, his sightless eyes lifted just above the floorboards, as if watching something invisible. Edmund's jaw tightened. "Serve," he commanded Dot, and Ayuba obeyed. His hands were steady as he ladled sauce onto Edmund's plate. He didn't tremble. He didn't smile. He just listened. The room's tension was a living thing now, pressing against his skin. Agnes's breathing quickened. Eleanor's fan snapped open. Thomas laughed nervously, trying to cover the unease. The food was eaten. Bite by bite, fork by fork, the Broussards welcomed poison into their bodies. They didn't know it yet. They couldn't imagine it. But Ayuba knew. He heard every swallow like a drumbeat counting down. He had planned this moment for weeks, maybe months. He had memorized the kitchen's rhythm, the cook's laziness, the pantry's silence, the way footsteps came and went at certain hours. He had waited until the perfect moment to add what no one could ever forget. They thought they were eating luxury. In truth, they were eating death. The first sign came quietly. Thomas stopped talking. His fork hovered above the plate. He blinked, then blinked again, his lips twitching as if searching for words. Julian's eyes darted nervously toward his brother, then back to his plate. Eleanor fanned herself, her cheeks flushed with sudden heat. The air felt heavy, like the room itself was holding its breath. Silas chuckled, slapping the table. "What's the matter, boy? Spice got your tongue?" Thomas reached for his wine. He missed the stem. His hand closed on air. The laughter died instantly. A glass tipped over and shattered against the floor. Everyone froze. Agnes's voice cut through the silence. "Edmund," she said, her tone sharper than the glass. Edmund frowned, pushing away doubt. "Boy," he snapped at Ayuba, "bring a towel." But Ayuba didn't move. He stood perfectly still, his head tilted, listening. He heard Thomas's shallow breathing. He heard Julian's fork clatter to his plate. He heard Eleanor whisper a prayer under her breath. He heard Silas's bravado drain away, and in that silence Ayuba smiled. No one saw it. No one but the dark. Days earlier, the field hands had whispered about Ayuba. They said they had seen him by the cistern at midnight, washing something in a bundle of cloth. They said they had heard him muttering names, not prayers, not psalms, but names. Edmund's, Eleanor's, Thomas's, Julian's, Silas's, Agnes's. Each name spat like poison into the night. But rumors are not evidence. Rumors don't sit at a table. Food does, and the food was working. Thomas's skin turned pale, sweat breaking across his forehead. Julian's lips trembled as he whispered, "Mother?" Eleanor pressed her fan harder against her chest, but it wasn't enough. The room was too hot, the air too thick. Agnes pushed back her chair, standing. "Something is wrong with this meal," she declared. Edmund slammed his fist against the table. "Enough of your nonsense, woman. It's nothing but spice." But it wasn't spice. It was filth. It was bacteria and decay, carried from places no respectable family could imagine, delivered by the hands of the blind man they thought was powerless. Ayuba tilted his head toward Edmund's voice. "I served," he said softly. The room fell silent. The first retching sound came from Thomas. He doubled over, his face slamming into his plate. Julian screamed. Eleanor grabbed her son, shaking him desperately. Silas pushed back his chair, his bravado gone. "What's happening?" he demanded, his voice cracking. Agnes turned her eyes on Ayuba. She studied him, the way he stood motionless, listening to their suffering like it was a hymn. She stepped closer, her old bones creaking, until she stood just a foot away from him. Her voice was a whisper of iron. "What have you fed us?" Ayuba's lips barely moved. "What was in the house?" Agnes inhaled sharply. She could smell it now beneath the spices, beneath the meat. A smell that had no place at a table. A smell of shame, of rot, of something that could never be washed away. Eleanor screamed again as Thomas collapsed to the floor, convulsing. Julian backed away, tears streaking his face. Silas gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white, his mouth opening, but no words coming out. Edmund stared at Ayuba, his face twisted in rage and disbelief. "You poisoned my house," he growled. Ayuba tilted his head. His blind eyes seemed to look right through Edmund. "No, sir," he replied softly. "I returned it." That night was only beginning. The true horror hadn't even started yet. What Ayuba had done would not only tear through their bodies, it would shatter the very foundation of the Broussard family. And as screams echoed through the Louisiana night, Ayuba stood in silence, listening. Because sometimes revenge has no voice. It only has a taste. The night did not end with Thomas choking on his breath. That was only the beginning. The poison Ayuba had chosen was not swift. It was slow, crawling through their bodies like 1,000 insects biting from the inside, dragging out every second of their misery. Julian, was the next to fall. His hands clutched his stomach as he stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. His scream was raw, childlike, full of terror. Eleanor rushed to him, her voice breaking as she begged God to take her instead. Her prayers mixed with the sound of vomit hitting the polished floor, a sound that would forever echo in her memory, if she lived long enough to have memories. Silas staggered from his seat, gripping the edge of the table, sweat dripping down his forehead. His laughter was gone now, replaced with the sounds of a man begging, a man realizing that he had lost control. "Tell me what you did, boy." He barked, but his voice cracked, and the strength behind it vanished with the bile rising in his throat. He gagged, his body folding over itself, and the room filled with the stench of sickness and fear. Agnes did not scream. She did not cry. She simply stared at Ayuba, her lips pressed into a thin line. She had lived long enough to know when death was in a room, and death was here, walking between the candlelight, sitting at the table, touching every plate and cup. She whispered to Edmund, her words steady, "This is judgment." Edmund's face twisted in fury. Judgment was for others, never for him. He took a step toward Ayuba, his boots heavy on the floorboards. But even his rage was cracking. His stomach tightened. His throat burned. His breath stuttered. He wanted to strike Ayuba to break his bones, but his body betrayed him. His knees buckled, and for the first time in his life, Edmund Broussard was forced to kneel. Ayuba did not move. He simply listened. The room was a storm of chaos, furniture overturned, silverware scattered, screams mixing with sobs, the stench of vomit and fear so thick it drowned the candlelight. Eleanor clutched Julian, rocking him back and forth as though her arms could stop the poison running through his veins. Thomas thrashed on the floor, his mouth foaming, his eyes rolling back. Silas crawled toward the door, dragging himself like an animal desperate to escape its cage. But there was no escape. The poison was already inside. Edmund raised his head, sweat dripping down his face. His voice was a rasp, but his fury was intact. "You think this gives you power?" he hissed. "You think this makes you more than what you are?" Ayuba tilted his head toward the sound, his blind eyes fixed on the man who had owned him, who had beaten him, who had stripped him of everything but breath. His reply was soft, but it cut sharper than any blade. "I am not more than what I am, master," he said. "I am exactly what you made me." Minutes stretched into hours. Time lost its shape inside that house. The screams weakened into whimpers. The defiance crumbled into begging. Eleanor prayed until her voice broke. Silas cursed God and man alike. Thomas no longer moved. Julian's sobs were quieter, each one shorter than the last. Agnes was the only one who refused to give the sickness the satisfaction of watching her beg. She sat back down at the table, her spine straight, her eyes locked on Ayuba. "Tell me," she whispered, "will any of us see the morning?" Ayuba turned his head slightly, as though considering the question. His lips parted, and his answer was not cruel, but honest. Maybe one, maybe none. A silence deeper than death filled the room. Agnes closed her eyes. For the first time that night, she looked teared. By midnight, the Broussard household was unrecognizable. The fine table was a battlefield of broken plates, spilled wine, and bloodied cloth. The air was thick with the smell of sickness. The proud family that once ruled their land now writhed in their own filth. Edmund tried to rise again, his pride dragging him up even as his body failed. His hand reached blindly toward Ayuba, shaking, weak, but still commanding. "You will hang for this," he spat. "Do you hear me, boy? They will hang you until your body breaks." Ayuba stepped closer, his bare feet silent on the wood. He leaned toward Edmund's broken face, his breath calm, his voice steady. "They will hang me, yes," he said, "but you will not be there to see it." Edmund's eyes widened. His mouth opened to curse, but the only sound that came was a dry gasp. His body seized, then fell limp against the floor. The master was gone. One by one the rest followed. Thomas's convulsions ended in silence. Julian's sobs melted into stillness. Silas crawled only a few more feet before collapsing in his own mess. Eleanor clung to her son until both were motionless. Only Agnes remained breathing when the clock struck 2. She sat alone, surrounded by death. Her eyes, pale and sharp, never left Ayuba. "You think you are free now," she whispered, her voice thin but strong. "But freedom bought with filth is only another prison." Ayuba did not answer. He stood silently, listening to the night, listening to the sound of freedom, not as a gift, but as revenge. Agnes coughed, her frail body trembling. "They will write about this. They will remember you as a monster." At that, Ayuba finally spoke. His voice was low, steady, final. "Better a monster than a slave." Agnes's head fell forward. Her breath faded into silence. The last candle flickered out. When dawn broke, the Broussard estate was quiet. Birds sang outside as though nothing had happened. The house smelled of death, of sickness, of secrets too foul to bury. And Ayuba stood in the doorway, his face lifted to the sunlight he could not see. For the first time in years, he felt the warmth of morning without the weight of chains pressing him down. He knew the world would not let him live long. He knew the rope was already waiting. But for that single moment, in the silence of a house that had ruled him and was now nothing but a tomb, Ayuba was free. And freedom, even for a single sunrise, was worth everything. Because sometimes vengeance doesn't come with fire or steel. Sometimes it comes in silence. Sometimes it comes in a taste you can never wash away.